Welcome to The Pestle, reviewing and breaking down movies to look for insights into the movie-making process. Hosted by kids with incredible taste in outdated music, because every witty kid memorizes obscure 90s bands. Let's dim the lights and start the show.
Welcome everybody to The Pestle. Today's show is brought to you by Simple Rick's Wafers. Get a taste of Rick in every wafer. Come home to Simple Rick's. Welcome everybody to The Pestle. I am Wes.
And I'm Todd.
And this is a movie podcast review / analysis. We like to do breakdowns on movies and TV shows to kind of learn a little bit more about the production process, maybe how to become better filmmakers, maybe insights into why someone did something. And lately we've been tackling TV shows just to build a little bit of a backlog and also to kind of do something we haven't really done before, which is break down things that probably more people have a greater familiarity with TV shows than most movies, especially the kind of movies we do. So this has been kind of interesting and a new tact that we've taken.
Yeah, it's been really enjoyable, actually. It's made me revisit some series that I really like and kind of like figure out how did they start. And it's been a little eye-opening because usually, like you watch something like Seinfeld and you kind of know how it is. You know kind of what to expect. But, how did it start? Like what was the impetus of it, and how did that evolve into what that it is now, or that it was at the end? It's like been really interesting to see that. I think this one in particular was a little, I'm not going to say jarring, but it was a little like, oh, interesting. That's really interesting, because that's definitely not how it was towards the end or even halfway through the series. And, oh, interesting. Things have changed. That's a little awkward. That was awkward interaction. And yeah.
What do you have a favorite TV show all time? Sitcom specifically.
A sitcom all time? I mean, Cheers.
Nice.
I just have to, after our episode, I went back and kept watching, and it's just, they're so good. And rarely do I laugh. In fact, I never laugh. I always, not always, but a lot of times I enjoy sitcoms. I can sit there and enjoy it, but I can't, I just don't laugh. But Cheers, I openly, I'm sitting here in my room or whatever, and I'm just, throwing on an episode or something, and I'll find myself chuckling and laughing. It never happens with sitcoms, other sitcoms. So yeah, that one. I mean, there's been others that I've, really enjoyed or grown up watching, and I really enjoy Seinfeld. I think that Seinfeld in particular is definitely one of my favorites. It's in my top 5, if not, 2 or 3. And I mean, one of the reasons is that you just never know what to expect. It's, you're not going to have explosions or any, drama. It's just almost never drama. But that's in a lot of cases, I kind of miss that in sitcoms. It's always good to break it up a little bit, but because it's about nothing, I don't really find myself needing it. It can, in fact, I feel like that the heavier it would get, the more it would ruin it. Right. Because it's just these crazy, friends going around trying to figure out all the idiosyncrasies of life. And anything heavy is not an idiosyncrasy. It is it's something where you can't really give an answer in 30 minutes. And they don't ever touch anything that you can't give an answer in a single scene, if not a single line. That's I think the impetus of the show itself. And it was so wonderful to watch that opening with George and Jerry sitting in the coffee shop. And honestly, the interaction with the waitress, I loved that. And I was sitting there watching it man, I wish they would have had her in it more. I felt like for some reason I just really liked her, picking on George, she's known him for a long time, So anyway.
Yeah, that deep sarcasm that is this rundown waitress who's just seen it all, done it all, and she's just trying to make it through the end of her day. The last thing she wants is one of her regulars giving her crap. And so
nobody wants to see you hopped up on caffeine, George.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, so we're
What
doing.
about you?
That's so tough. I mean, I haven't seen a lot of sitcoms. I'm probably on the same track as you, though. I would say, uh, Cheers is definitely top five, if not my number one. Um, God, yeah, I don't really have very far to go. Like Seinfeld has always been great. I'm pretty sure I haven't seen every single episode of Seinfeld. So this is one that I could probably sit down and watch and see, you know, 5 or 10 new episodes that I've never seen before. And yeah, I would be okay with that. I mean, I really enjoy obviously How I Met Your Mother, and I'm sure there's a few from when I was young that I enjoyed at the time that I probably would just be like, oh, that was fun for one episode. I'm done. Something like Growing Pains or uh, Who's the Boss, or some of those silly one-off ones that they were fun in the moment, but as soon as the episode ended, you kind of forgot about it. Like, just complete throwaway. And then there's others that have not aged very well. Something like The Cosby Show, or I want to say even some of the classics. Pow, Right to the Moon. I can't think of that.
Oh, The Honeymooners.
The Honeymooners. Like, I don't know how well that's aged. I haven't tried to watch it, but a lot of it sounded like there was a lot of violence at home. So,
You know what would be good is that probably still holds up to this day is I Love Lucy.
yeah, I did love I Love Lucy a lot growing up. She was just amazing. She was just an incredible comedic actress that way ahead of her time. Like, she just, I assume, changed the scope. Obviously, I wasn't around when that was airing, but for it to still be relevant and growing up and watching that, similar to like a Laverne and Shirley, I grew up, watching pieces of that here and there. Yeah, there's a few. I wish I'd grown up watching Mary Tyler Moore. I've never really seen that before, but something like that, or Bob Newhart. Like, there's just a bunch of little random things that I saw here and there, just enough to know that exists. And there's a few things.
So I grew up watching a lot. I loved this show when I was a kid, which is really weird because it was old even when I was a kid. But Mama's Family, with Carol Burnett, and or not Carol Burnett. Who was it? Was it Carol Burnett? I can't remember now. Oh my gosh, I'm losing it. Anyway, and that was an example of a female comedian, but doing a role that, like an older role or whatever. But Lucy, man, she did it first. She was like this a physical comedian as well as a verbal comedian. She, like the famous chocolate factory scene where they're like eating they're trying to wrap all the chocolates and they keep coming faster and they start like, you couldn't just be any person doing that. It had to be done in a certain physical way to be funny. And she was just like the master of that. But at the same time, she could break your heart in just a second, if she wanted to. So anyway, segue to Seinfeld.
Yeah, and just by the way, you were correct. It is Carol Burnett and Mom's Family.
Okay, great. Thank you for doing that research.
Yeah. So
what are we going to cover on Seinfeld?
So we're going to cover a lot of things, and just a heads up, we'll talk or reference at least not just Seinfeld, but How I Met Your Mother, Friends, and Cheers, just to give a little contrast. Probably not a lot, not enough to ruin any of those shows, but for reference. And we'll talk about story and writing, cinematography, and other such stuff and things and stuff.
It's pretty impossible to ruin Seinfeld.
Yeah.
It's about nothing.
It's really, yeah.
Which means it's about everything, which is
True.
daunting if you look at it that way. So a quick synopsis, which is interesting to give a synopsis of this. The continuing misadventures of neurotic New York City stand-up comedian Jerry Seinfeld and his equally neurotic New York City friends. Well done. Created by Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld, featuring Jerry Seinfeld as Jerry Seinfeld, Michael Richards as Kramer, Jason Alexander as George Costanza, Julia Louis-Dreyfus as Elaine Benes.
And you didn't even hear how she sounded. What? Laura. I can't believe we already discussed
this!
Yeah, but how could you be so sure?
Cause it's signals, Jerry, it's signals, don't you know? All right. Did she even ask you what you were doing tomorrow night if you were busy?
No.
She calls you today, she doesn't make a plan for tomorrow? When is that? It's Saturday night.
Yeah.
What is that? It's ridiculous. You don't even know what hotel she's staying at. You can't call her. That's a signal, Jerry. That's a signal. Signal.
Maybe you're right.
Maybe I'm right. Of course I'm right.
This is insane. You know, I don't even know where she's staying. She's not gonna call me. It's unbelievable.
Listen, your stuff has to be done by now. Why don't you just see if it's dry? Just, you know.
No. Don't interrupt the cycle. The machine is working. It knows what it's doing. Just let it finish.
You're gonna over-dry it.
You can't over-dry.
Why not?
Same reason you can't over-wet. See, once something is wet, it's wet. Same thing with death. Like, once you die, you're dead, right? Let's say you drop dead and I shoot you. You're not gonna die again. You're already dead. You can't over-die. You can't over-dry.
Any questions?
Can't over dry, can't over die. Perfect.
That kind of epitomizes, like, they bounce back and forth, I think, throughout the entire run of the show, of completely meaningless observations about day-to-day life mixed in with similarly maybe semi-reasonable observations about dating culture. And that's kind of the crux of it. I think that's the similarity, obviously, between all four of these sitcoms that we've touched on. And I would be shocked if it isn't the running theme in most sitcoms, that it's about love at the end of it. And obviously Seinfeld takes a different approach. Like, there's never really any hope in their love lives. It's always absolutely doomed. As compared to How I Met Your Mother, Friends, and Cheers. Like, they always felt like there was the opportunity for something to go right. And here they start from the opening, you know, picking apart the reasons why Jerry is not going to succeed. And it just keeps going and going. What was it like? You kind of started touching on a little bit of watching the pilot versus knowing how the rest of the run of the series goes. How was watching this thing?
It was fantastic. It was fun to, one, I haven't watched it in a while, so it was fun to revisit the characters again. And I was really excited to see how are they going to introduce Kramer. And he didn't slide in like he ended up normally doing. He just walked in, right?
Halfway at first, right? He kind of just sticks his head in and then kind of like, almost like there was something blocking him from opening the door. It's all this physical stuff.
Yeah. And that's what I meant by like the awkward interactions. Like, it was like the first time you see Kramer and his interaction with Jerry is like very, because Kramer's character is, at least towards the end or even halfway or a quarter of the way through the series, is very, you know, like, he knows what he's talking about and he's aggressive and he's he just does things, right? But in this case, he doesn't just go straight to the fridge. He asks if he has any meat, which is and it's normally not, even if he later on in the series, if he asks for something, it's normally not an awkward moment. But this felt like it just felt awkward, like not fully developed, right? Kramer was definitely not fully developed. I feel like Jerry always has been Jerry. Mm-hmm. George does develop a little bit, but he's pretty much George, kind of like knows it all, you know, or he like acts like he does. And then we never meet Elaine, which is interesting. So yeah, I think the biggest development was in Kramer. Like, his character becomes bigger throughout the series. So he just seemed very small and almost throwaway in a way, but not throwaway because he added a lot of comedy. I mean, the bread in the pockets is perfect. Which makes me think that, and I don't know this, but it seems like it would be something that like an actor would suggest.
Yeah, that was what I was thinking.
I think my character might have bread in his pockets instead of like walking in with bread in his hand, right? I'm just going to put it in my pockets. This is the character I am. And that's just kind of what it felt like, and it totally worked. And then his slow eating of the meat out of the bread, like, was just fantastic. And so I think that the bones of his character were there, and it was the actor who, which I can't for whatever remember his name for whatever reason. Michael Richards. I think it was Michael Richards who really developed it throughout the next, I don't know, a few episodes, couple seasons or whatever, into what Kramer actually was. But it was really enjoyable to watch, and it holds up totally. I loved it. I thought, I mean, obviously it's old and there are things that developed, but the comedy is there. Like, it's exactly what it ended up being at the end. It's just about this and that, like little things. You have no idea what they're going to talk about next. And because it could be some tiny little thing, but that turns into the entire conversation in that episode. And there are always things that you can relate to because you're a human being. They only talk about stuff that human beings go through or talk about or don't talk about, but think about maybe. And maybe that's what it is, but it's wonderful. Also, I remember the first time I ever saw Seinfeld, it was like, oh, he's doing comedy. I'm like watching his stand-up comedy in the episode, and it's real. It's like live in front of people. It was interesting. They did almost a 180 back on the audience at one point while he's on stage, and they never did that later on. It was always just him on stage, in front of the camera, but they never put the camera behind him to show the audience later on. But we get that view, I guess, to prove to us like this is actually live and it's for real, doing his bit, or at least give that feeling. And it does break up the story to be able to go cut back to him doing his stand-up, and it leads into what they're talking about, in the next scene when they go back to George and him talking or whomever. So yeah, it was great. It was great.
I was surprised. So last night, Seinfeld, a new stand-up special popped up on Netflix.
Oh, whoa. Perfect timing.
Really random. And I started watching it, and literally he goes right back to the same opening as this show whenever he's doing the whole bit about going out. Like, we're out right now. That's what we're doing. We're always talking about it, And he opens his stand-up within 5 minutes. He goes right back to that bit. And it's slightly varied, but not by much. And I was just like, wow, that's interesting. Comics spend years honing, these bits and tinkering with them and modifying them as they age to see what's the best punchline, what's the best entry and exit out of these, bits. And so I was just really surprised that, some almost 30 years later, we're seeing him still performing, some of these bits and still getting laughs, and people are still entertained. And it's only by sheer coincidence that I just happened to see the pilot, and then immediately go and watch this, or else you'd never remember that. You never remember that. Oh yeah, he did that in the opening of Seinfeld. Like, no, probably not. Like, even hardcore fans aren't going to remember all of your bits, especially whenever you've had 5 or 6 seasons on a show. But yeah, I largely had the same reaction as you did. I would say exactly what you were talking about with George. He's already, especially for a pilot, he's fully engaged. He's got all these nuances. The physicality is already kind of there. His speaking, his mannerisms, he's already in near peak form. And I would say he doesn't really change much. He does shift it and grow it and become better. But that may just be largely a result of the writing growing and developing. And I think it's such a big difference between these actors all there, and obviously as the show grows, the writing gets much, much tighter, and they're getting in and out of scenes quicker, and the storylines get much bigger. Here we basically only have one storyline, which is Jerry has a guest coming into town, and everything else is just kind of odds and ends, right? They open in the diner about the shirt, like that button is misplaced, and he's just going on about about the buttons on his shirt, which segues into the dating stuff, and then we go back to the laundromat. That same thing, we start talking about boredom and laundry. That switches right back into his dating life, and then he meets Kramer, and that's our introduction to Kramer that quickly switches right back into the dating stuff, and they're very disciplined about that. But I can see that in, later seasons, at least, they, instead of having like one storyline, they'll have, at least 3 storylines going at any one time, in an episode. And so that's just a product of getting more familiar with your characters. And I think also allowing the audience to be more familiar so that you don't have to do quite as much introduction, right? You already know Kramer is going to be doing something really weird and offbeat. George is going to be scamming, one way or another. And Jerry's going to be trying to finagle his dating life and also negotiate his friends all dealing with stuff. I was surprised we didn't see Elaine. I don't know when she enters. I was kind of suspecting, is this how we meet Elaine? She's the Minnesota woman coming into town, because I just don't remember when she arrives, or why she arrives. And so that's something that I think I will keep watching and trying to see, how it progresses. But I think this largely comes from the actor's ability to kind of step in and immediately be on. Even Kramer's pretty well on, even though his character isn't quite as funky as he ends up getting. But like the physicality, right? He's halfway into the fridge, and that gets a good laugh out of the audience. And he's just like the dog. He's like, he's gonna go use the bathroom, or he's getting a drink of water. Yeah. Like, he makes the dog sound like a human, just in his reference. It's largely there, but he does grow so much. I think a little in performance, but definitely in character type. And I was just surprised, I guess, just by how much room there was still to grow. But I think the reason that the performances are so on already is that these are all very seasoned actors. Like at this stage, as compared to something like Friends and How I Met Your Mother, especially How I Met Your Mother, these were all very mostly new actors. Like if you look at how, especially Ted, Jason Segel was kind of already, he had a few shows already, like he'd done Freaks and Geeks, and so he'd had some seasoning already, but he was still really young in his career. Whereas I think Josh Radnor was just getting going, and Kobe Smulders grew a ton in that show. Like she became the funniest person on the show, probably halfway through the series. And so there was just so much more space to grow. Whereas, we step into Seinfeld, and Jerry Seinfeld is already a world famous comedian. And all these other guys have probably been floating around for quite some time, probably already knew each other to some degree or another. And so their ability to kind of step into these characters, I'm sure they had more pre-production time to kind of explore and work with Larry David to figure out, like, who are these people? What are they contributing to the scene? And so...
Well, I think that Jerry just played himself.
Yeah.
It was easy for him. Yeah. I do know, because I've seen the Comedians in Cars Getting Coffee that Jerry did with Michael Richards. What was it, 2 years ago? It was after his whole, comedy store debacle, meltdown or whatever. And he was pretty adamant about how apologetic he was. He was like, it got heavy in the show. But anyway, he was saying in it that Jerry gave him his shot. So it doesn't mean that he wasn't seasoned.
Sure.
Like he had been doing other stuff, but at least in terms of something either that size or with a character like that, like basically this was his breakout. You know what I mean? But I know that Jason Alexander had been doing. He'd done a lot of plays, a lot of stage performance before that. So he's used to memorizing lines, and he's used to like developing a character, in something that has to happen immediately, right? So,
and that translates so well whenever you're coming from a theater background and stepping onto a sitcom stage, especially because the cinematography here is very simple and a lot of basic setups for a soundstage, right? We stay in wides and mediums, a lot of two shots to show the performers with each other and their physicality. like the flailing arms and hands and gesturing, and that's all very theatric. And so it makes sense to stay in these kind of wider shots. Like if you see if you watch the scene where Kramer enters, we stay in that wide for quite a while. Like it's a single shot, for quite some time before I think we cut to a medium of him in the fridge. And that plays so well theatrically because the wider you are, it imitates a stage and allows you to do much more gesturing without it being, overflowing the frame, so that you can really capture all their mannerisms and the physicality. Because as shows go, this is a very physical show. You may not necessarily think that because, I think people hear a lot of physical comedy and they start thinking, Three's Company, Jack falling over the couch kind of stuff. And that's not really, that's one part of it, but it's not necessarily that. It's all the mannerisms and gesturing, and it's kind of getting into your character. Like even in that bit that we played with them in the laundromat, whenever Jerry goes back to the whole dating thing, you didn't even hear, what she sounded like on the phone. George's first response is to fall on his knees and start begging, like, we've already been over this.
Yeah, like what?
And it's so good. And then he's immediately right back up and he's popping his fingers and like really animated. And that's very exhausting because he's been doing it all week. You usually rehearse these things for a week and then you perform it for the audience on, Friday or Saturday. And so you've been doing this all week. Of course, the audience gives you new life. Suddenly you're doing it in front of a crowd. So you can get several takes in without wearing down. But I think it's the kind of thing where, like an athletic event, it's not until you step off stage that you realize, like, oh my God, I am smoked. I have nothing left. And then suddenly it all kind of hits you like a ton of bricks because you're just feeding off the audience and off the crowd, and using that to launch you. And that's easier in the first half of a series, I'm sure. Like by season 5 or 6, you're probably pretty tired of all this and having to find new ways to make it interesting to you. But I was surprised that they kept us fairly, I want to say, intimate. Like a lot of these settings are semi-intimate, like they're at the diner table, and even though they're in a restaurant, we're not really seeing the restaurant. We're seeing them interact with each other and with the waitress. We're in an apartment. We're at the laundrette, and which just seemed like a fun little throw off because I don't know how often they go back to that laundrette. Like,
I don't think so.
And that's kind of cool that they just said, hey, we're going to build this one set for this one thing, or borrow someone else's, I guess, and move on. Like, we're not coming back to this. You don't see that a lot, I don't think, in pilots. If I think back to Friends or How I Met Your Mother, obviously in Cheers, we kind of stay in one space the entire time. But the others, we see them use setups that they're going to be using for the rest of that season. And they're not gambling away budget on one-offs.
Yeah.
That's something you really got to consider. The other, just thinking about sets right now, I'm kind of surprised that these sets they're kind of humdrum. Like his apartment, I guess kind of becomes iconic, but at the same time, I think if you were to show that setup to me, if this was the first time watching it, I wouldn't think, oh, this is a really fun space to inhabit. It's tedious. It's anything but. It's very New York City in the sense that it's minimalist and kind of cluttered, and there's nothing really interesting happening in that scene. Whereas if you go to the Friends or How I Met Your Mother and obviously Cheers, there's a ton happening in those scenes. But obviously their setup plays very much into the heart of this show, which is, hey, it's really not about nothing. Like the show is us and us kind of pointing out, meaningless, bizarre, tedious things. And so let's not make these sets too interesting.
Yeah.
It needs to represent what an apartment looks like in New York. And that's a fair representation, I think.
Absolutely. I agree.
Yeah. I feel like I had one or two other things. I didn't write it down, so it couldn't have been too interesting. Oh, I thought, frick, just saying oh made me lose it.
Uh-oh. Sorry.
Yeah, well, I think just the run of the show, how it ends is what I wanted to kind of touch on.
Yeah.
Because this show ends much differently than any other show ends. Like most shows, especially How I Met Your Mother, Friends, tons of other shows like that, where you have this core cast and a core space that they inhabit. Well, I'm not going to throw out other shows, but they tend to end very similarly, where there's this kind of goodbye to the space. We're saying we're going to say goodbye to the apartment. We're going to give all these characters reasons why the show is ending, and they're all moving on with their lives, and they all have new places to go. Seinfeld kind of just said, nope, we're all getting thrown in jail, and we're supposed to keep going, but we're not. This is just, and now they're in purgatory, like they're just forever in jail.
How did you feel about that?
At the time, I didn't feel any kind of way. I thought it was funny, and I think I just saw everyone else's frustration with it. Like, what? So they're just going to be in jail for the rest of their lives? I was like, I was a kid, so I didn't really have a strong opinion one way or the other. But thinking back on it now, I love it. I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Especially in context with all these other shows that do these big send-offs.
Yeah, it was. I remember thinking, really? That's it? Really? But now that I think about it, okay, so something like Cheers, right? And we already warned people about spoilers, so whatever. So with Cheers, the last line is, I believe, sorry, bar's closed.
Oh, wow.
Right? That's Sam's last line. That's it, I believe. And so we're saying, like you said, saying bye to the space, saying bye to the main character. We've already said goodbye to Diane, like everybody. And then that's it. But for this, that whole show took place in a bar. It was never anywhere else, really. There might have been a scene or two, but really, for the most part, all 9 years, we're there in that bar. So you kind of have to say goodbye to that. But with Seinfeld, they're outside. They go, upstate. They're in a laundromat. They're in the deli. They're in his apartment. They're in Kramer's apartment. They're at George's parents' house. They're all over the place. There's so many sets. You cannot say goodbye to all of them, even though I want to say goodbye to George's parents' place. I loved that. Him living with them was freaking awesome. So yeah, you kind of can't do that. And it would probably feel, after time, it might feel cheap to try to do that. So take them out of that space. And really what you're saying bye to are the characters, right? And they're all together. And how do you get them all together? Well, for it not to feel forced, but to literally be forced, you put them in a cage, right? Yeah. So now all of their, and also they were pretty shitty people in a lot of ways, right? It's so superficial and everything. And I do not think that necessarily there was anything deeper, any other deeper meaning putting them in jail. Like, that's what we're all in jail if we act this way, whatever our own personal jail. I don't think it's Larry David and Jerry Seinfeld. I really, not that I don't think they can be deep. I totally know they can, but I think their point with this show was to not be, was to be so on the surface that literally anyone on the planet could watch it and relate to it. Right. So, and then maybe, I don't know, maybe I could be wrong and there is that deeper meaning in that, but
no, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that's the whole point of using the stand-up bits in the show itself, because most stand-up comedy is this universal discussion about life.
Yeah.
And so using that is kind of telling us how comics use life to inform their comedy. And here it's this, perfect circle of, we're seeing the stand-up bit, and then we're seeing how life develops, and then we're seeing how he uses these pieces of his offbeat life to kind of inform his comedy. So it's this nice little circle that he's using, that most comedy is very generic and broad. And it's finding those little eccentricities within those broad categories that allows people to identify and relate. Because especially in America, we're all very familiar with going out and the idea of once you go out, you're tired and you want to go back.
It's like a lot of stand-up comedy is very superficial, so that everybody can get it and everybody laughs and everybody understands it. So they're basing this whole show off of his stand-up comedy. So there's literally endless content.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, us having an awkward conversation where I'm saying something and there's a delay between because we're on webcam.
We're on what
could result in
you're going. Okay.
Could result in an entire episode of Seinfeld. You know what I'm saying?
Totally. I mean, and there's been some shows that have done this really well. Whenever I think about, I don't know if anybody's watching Avenue 5 or Silicon Valley, like they do some really great bits on exactly that. And it's the kind of stuff that would fit perfectly into a Seinfeld episode. Yeah, in a number of ways. And so, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, using the jail bit, and I'm trying to remember in that episode, I think it's because there was a Good Samaritan law, and they didn't help someone after they'd been robbed, and they just kind of all sat around watching. And it goes to your point, like, these are pretty terrible people because they did just sit and watch someone get robbed because they're New Yorkers. And I think that's kind of the hardened aspect of being a New Yorker, is understanding that, hey, your drama is not my drama. I can't get involved in your life or else I'm never going to get to wherever I'm trying to go. And this is an endless cycle anyway. Like I'm going to go down the street and see someone else in trouble, and they step outside of New York and wherever it is, I think Maine maybe, and then they take that attitude into another state. It doesn't fit. Like suddenly what they're doing, what their day-to-day life feels like, is suddenly against the law and gets them thrown in jail. And maybe there's some, joke of a moral in there, but it's perfect. It's very fitting of their characters. And yeah, I loved it. So looking back, I loved it. I didn't have a strong opinion at the time, but I think it's absolutely perfect.
Agreed, man.
Nice. Wow. Yeah. Last question. Do you have a favorite bit or thing that pops to mind frequently when it comes to Seinfeld?
Huh. That is a really good question.
Like I think the most famous one is Festivus, right? I got a lot of problems with you people.
Man, there's so many. There's the Soup Nazi.
Soup Nazi's good.
There's the George sleeping under his desk at work, which probably is. I think that's my favorite. George is my favorite.
Yeah.
Of all of them, George is my favorite. What was the one? George, Kramer taking pictures of George on the couch.
Was that an episode?
Or was it Kramer taking picture? Yeah.
I'm familiar with the picture, but I didn't know that came out of an episode.
It was a whole episode, bro, of him taking pictures on that couch. Newman.
Putty was, an amazing kind of one-off character.
Yes, he really was. Just, oh my gosh. I mean, I really can't pick one. I love the concept.
Yeah.
Of like, I mean, dude, we could sit down and write an episode of Seinfeld in an hour, honestly. Like, and it would be funny because it's real. Yeah. That's the thing. It's like, you don't even need, that's the brilliance of it. You don't even need to try hard. You just write stuff down. And because it's factual and someone else is saying it and you haven't said it, but you've experienced it, it all of a sudden is completely relatable and can be funny if it's delivered in the right way. So it's all in the delivery. I imagine seeing a script of a Seinfeld episode and thinking this isn't funny, but then when you watch it and you watch these characters saying these things, all of a sudden it's funny, right? And that is the brilliance of it. It's like understanding what funny is, and that it's not words on a page, that it's literally the delivery, and embracing that through casting and through directing and through acting is just unreal. Like there's never been a show like this, and I would hope there would be another one, but there hasn't been yet.
I think that's such a good point because I've seen and I've done Seinfeld scenes in acting class.
Oh, cool.
And it is interesting to watch someone perform that isn't familiar with the content, and suddenly what's normally a very funny scene can be like dry and a miss. It's just like, why are we talking about like a price tag on a jacket right now? This isn't funny. And so it is, you're totally right. I mean, the writing is obviously fantastic, but it has to be paired with the right performance and the right attitude going in. One thing, the one I don't know if it's my favorite, but one that I always think about a lot is the garbage disposal in the shower. When Kramer installs a garbage disposal in the shower.
Oh my gosh.
And he's cooking in there, and he makes a meal, and like it comes up as everyone's eating that, yeah, I made it in my shower. It's like, wait, what? And so usually when I'm like showering, I look at the drain. I'm like, I wonder if I could get the garbage disposal in there. Just brilliant. So random. His TV show right in the apartment that has no cameras. Just genius level writing. So that said, what are you going to recommend this week?
So I felt like I wanted recommend something clean, and not clean as in like bad words, but clean as in like shot clean, and just kind of like where you can take your mind out of the details of everything, even though because there's so much detail given to you, you don't need to think about it. And so I immediately went to Wes Anderson, and I'm going to recommend The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou, whatever.
Zissou, yeah.
That's Zissou. Just an incredible film that really, I think that Rushmore really put him on the map, obviously, and then Royal Tenenbaums was, really established his style. But for some reason, The Life Aquatic just has this like human element to it that I don't think that he had really at least hit home with me yet with those two. So The Life Aquatic.
Nice. I'm going to stay on the New York theme and recommend, if you have HBO, to check out How to Make It in America. It's still a bit of a comedy. It's not like a hardcore sitcom, but it's funny, and it's also interesting to see. It's kind of like Entourage, in the sense that you're watching a group of friends try to figure it out and become successful. And in this case, it's about the fashion industry, and it's two buddies in I don't know if it's Queens or where, but they're trying to become successful clothing designers, and it's really good, man. It's one of those shows where anybody who watches it gets really frustrated that there was only 2 or 3 seasons. Because you just get really attached to these characters and their stories and where they're going, and it's absolutely fantastic and highly recommend it. How to Make It in America. Yeah,
love it.
So stay tuned next week when we finally tackle Parasite.
Late and as necessarily late.
Yeah.
Yes. This is not a film that you want to cover right away.
No. And this was a special request from Charlie, so appreciate you, buddy, with the good review. So we'll be tackling that next week. And don't forget to subscribe, review us on iTunes, like Charlie. Guys, be more like a Charlie in your life. And if there's a movie or something you want us to cover, let us know. If you want to comment on this episode about Seinfeld, you can do that at the pestlepodcast.com/Seinfeld.
And we'll leave you with a quote of the day from Calvin and Hobbes. Thank you for taking my advice here. Okay, so this is a strip from Calvin and Hobbes. Calvin, this is Calvin saying this. Isn't it strange that evolution would give us a sense of humor? When you think about it, it's weird that we have a physiological response to absurdity. We laugh at nonsense. We like it. We think it's funny. Don't you think it's odd that we appreciate absurdity? Why would we develop that way? How does it benefit us? Hobbes says, I suppose if we couldn't laugh at things that don't make sense, we couldn't react to a lot of life. Oh my gosh. And Calvin replies, I can't tell if that's funny or really scary. Because most of life doesn't make sense.
It really doesn't.
And either that's scary or it can be funny. And I think that Seinfeld is a great example of a way to make it funny. The absurd, the unanswerable, the questions, which we have millions of. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Well done.
They do such a good job of making any topic, and not that they're unique in this, but turning like something sex, becomes really funny. Even something as complicated or sensitive as contraception, right, becomes this running theme throughout the show of the sponge, and it becomes this whole ordeal. Like that's such a great skill to take these sensitive topics in life and making them absurd and something to laugh at, because a lot of life is that way. I remember I was dating someone who always thought, from a macro top level perspective, anthropological perspective, that sex is so weird. Like, sex is so funny. Like, two people decide to get together and like get naked and rub their bodies all over each other. It's so weird if you just think about that, from a animalistic perspective. Like, what are we doing? But it's obviously necessary for life, and so much of life is that way. And I love Seinfeld's ability to kind of break the monotony of the day and point these little obscure oddities out to us, and make us appreciate being human and culture and society. Yeah. Love it.
Agreed. Well done using that quote. That's awesome. All right. So thank you guys again for joining us. This has been so much fun covering all of these pilot episodes. But we're going to get back to movies next week, covering Parasite. Make sure to join us then. Until then, I'm Todd.
I'm Wes.
Go watch some movies. Oh, am I over there?
Yeah. So if I look to my right,
let's do it.
Your left. You got to look to your left.
My left. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.